What if I told you that your anxiety, your emotional struggles, even your chronic illness aren't random? Dr. Gabor Maté reveals something most doctors never will: that unhealed emotional wounds from your childhood are silently shaping your health, your habits, and your entire life. And it's not your fault. This isn't just about trauma. It's about a toxic culture that keeps you disconnected from yourself. But once you understand this, healing truly begins. Stay with me. This might just change how you see your entire life. If you've ever felt unheard, unseen, or like the wounds from your past still hold you back, you're not alone. This space is for you. Here, we heal, we grow, and we rediscover who we truly are beyond the pain, beyond the past. And if you're ready to step into your healing journey and finally embrace your authentic self, hit that subscribe button, because your inner child matters, and together, we can rewrite your story. And before we dive in, I want you to affirm this drop. I am healing in the comments. Let's remind ourselves and each other.
Well, so 70% of American adults are at least on one medication. 70%. 40% are on 2 medications or more. The number of children being diagnosed with all manner of dysfunctions, disorders, mental health challenges like ADHD, self-cutting, addictions, anxiety, depression, childhood suicide keeps going up. In the United States, annually, twice as many people die of overdoses as died in the Iraq, Vietnam, and Afghan wars put together. This is every year.
Wow.
The life expectancy, particularly of white men, has gone down due to suicide and drug overdoses. I mean, I could go, the number of autoimmune, I could go on forever, but just statistically, there's more and more evidence of illness and dysfunction.
Yeah.
And I mean, I used to work with what is North America's most concentrated area of drug use in Vancouver, British Columbia. And I know you were there a month ago.
Yeah, we went down on Catchings, is that right? Hastings.
Hastings, yeah.
We went down on Hastings just to take a drive and see.
Well, so that's where I used to work.
Wow.
For 12 years as a physician. And everybody down there was severely traumatized in childhood, and their addictions were all a response to immense emotional pain that they didn't know how else to handle. Not to mention the racial aspect, like 30% of my clients were Indigenous, whereas they only make up 5% of the Canadian population.
Wow.
So the more you suffer, either socially or individually, the more likely you are to escape in the soothing and the relief that drugs or other addictions offer. So if you look at American society, you really got to be asking, why are so many people having to escape from reality?
Yeah.
So trauma is one of these words that everybody throws around.
Yeah, it's a buzzword.
Yeah, so let's just define it. So trauma literally comes from the Greek word for wound or wounding. So trauma is a wound, whether it's a physical wound or a psychological wound. In this case, we're talking about emotional wounds that haven't healed. So trauma is an unhealed wound that you sustain in childhood, but then it stays with you. And it directly causes inflammation in the body. It affects how your genes function, how your chromosomes function. It stresses your organs. It creates all kinds of physiological problems. On the emotional level, it instills a lot of pain in you that you try to escape from. And one of the ways you try to escape, for example, is through drug use or to other kinds of addictions, or through self-cutting or bulimia or any, pornography or whatever. It also makes you suppress, disconnects you from your own emotions, because when a child is being traumatized, it's too painful to connect to themselves. So they disconnect. And that disconnect then causes all kinds of problems in terms of illness, mental and physical. So the impacts of trauma are vast and quite under-recognized.
Indeed. And you talk about trauma also as not being seen and known.
Yeah. So here we have to understand what are the needs of the human child. So everybody understands that the child needs to be physically cared for, cleaned up, fed, and sheltered, and so on. Children, according to evolution, also have emotional needs that they're born with. One of them is being just accepted and valued for exactly who they are, and being seen rather than being forced to be something that the parents want them to be.
Yeah.
And a lot of parents in this society, not because they don't love their kids, but because they're so stressed, have just a hard time seeing their kids. I had trouble seeing my kids.
Wow.
And that had an impact on them. And not because I wasn't devoted, because I didn't love them, just because of my own trauma, I couldn't even see myself.
Oh, man, I can relate so much to I can relate so much to that. Yeah, it's like, it's funny because I work as a comedian, and I grew up in a kind of a traumatic home. Like my mom was very busy. She had 4 children, and yeah, I feel like she never looked at me. I feel like she never kind of put her hands on me. I feel like she didn't know how, I guess, it's okay. Yeah, I just always felt like I wasn't seen.
And how do you suppose that affected you?
Well, I ended up becoming a comedian. I felt like I had to find some way to be seen. I had to do something, to get someone to see me, because I needed to survive. I needed to feel alive.
It's funny about comedians. May I say something about them?
Yeah.
I looked at the biographies of a number of comedians. What you're talking about is like a common theme. I looked at Robin Williams, who's this brilliant comic, and one of the reasons he developed his humor was to make his mother laugh, as a way of having his mother pay attention to him. Gilda Radner, who died of ovarian cancer, the same thing.
Wow.
So that they had the innate talent, but then they used that talent to be seen and valued where they should have been valued with or without talent.
No matter what.
That's the dilemma for so many of us, is that as a result of childhood wounding, we have to make ourselves into something that the world will accept and value. Look, in my case, I love having been a physician, and that's my calling. But the big part of it wasn't just that I wanted to help humanity or heal people. It's also I needed to be important. Now, why did I need to be important? Because as an infant, I got the message that I wasn't.
Yeah.
And so now then, and that creates a kind of an addiction, because you have to keep proving to yourself how important you are and how valuable you are. But nobody should have to prove how valuable they are. That's just our birthright, that we exist. We have the right to be here.
Yeah, that God chose us, or that the energies of the world chose us and said, I'm going to put you here with a fine pen. I'm going to put you in the world.
Yeah.
And I did it on purpose. And the world, it was built to take care of you and to nurture you and to make you feel welcome as you are.
And if you actually look at, and this has been studied quite extensively, how indigenous people or tribal peoples close to the land rear their kids, that's exactly how they rear their kids. Like they give their children a deep sense of acceptance. They hold them, they carry them everywhere.
Oh yeah, all the paintings you see of Native Americans, somebody's got a kid on them. They got them in a knapsack. They got them they got them.
And they tend not to hit their kids.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you never seen a movie about a Native American beating his children, I don't think.
Yeah. So what you're describing is actually how we evolved. And part of the toxicity, in my view, of our culture is we've gone so far away from our nature when it comes to how we rear children. And again, not because of lack of parental devotion, but because of so much parental stress.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I think that was it. My mom couldn't see us because she had other things she had to see first.
Yeah.
And, and not just me, but so many people. It's like, we've created a society, or our society has created a way of life where now it's like both parents work in so many cases. So, and that alone just feels like it just shouldn't be that way. It's like,
well, if you look at throughout evolution, through millions of years and hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution, children were always with their parents. That's how nature designed it.
yeah,
Now, if that's not possible in today's society, at least then we have to compensate for it. But we've forgotten that children need that.
yeah,
So now when they send them to daycares and schools, it's all about behavior and it's all about fitting in, not about accepting the child and nurturing the child innate sense of who they are. So we all end up disconnected from ourselves.
Yeah.
Then we get to a certain stage in life, we're wondering, whose life am I leading anyway?
yeah,
But that's, but the fitting in happens naturally when you're
Right.
when you're accepted. You know, listen, the schools. I'll tell you something. One of the, I'm talking science here. One of the essential needs of all mammals is play. In our brain, there's circuitry for play. You can see it. Dolphins play, little elephants play, bear cubs, lion cubs, puppies, kittens, they all play. Why? Play is essential for brain development. It's far more important than academic learning. So then in the schools, there ought to be a lot more play, a lot more freedom for the kids to be themselves, a lot more freedom to move around. And then those kids will be naturally curious and interested in learning. But here we try to put the cart before the horse. We try and stuff them full of knowledge, skills, and behavioral control rather than, again, promoting the conditions for healthy brain development. So the schools actually, they intend well, but they really don't get it when
Yeah.
it comes to what do children actually need. More and more people are getting sick, more addicted, more people are dying of overdoses. The problem in our society is there's very little that actually promotes healing, and there's very much that undermines it. This society loves you to be addicted, feeling inadequate. This path towards wholeness is this addiction that I have is not a disease that I inherited, but it's my attempt to escape from pain. And the more I learn about that pain, the less I'll inflict those imprints on myself and on the people, whether it's addiction, chronic physical illness, what we call mental illness, dysfunctions. They all have a template of childhood wounding, and they're not separate biological events happening in discrete individuals, but they are representative of a process inside each of us that manifests our relationship to our environment. Most importantly, our early rearing environment, but also the culture that we live in. So that, to give it one example, it's an obvious example. If you look at the number of kids diagnosed with, say, ADHD, the numbers are going up all the time. That can't be an individual thing. That has to say something about the culture, the context. Or if you look at the rising incidence of autoimmune disease, the rising incidence of addictions, of mental health conditions, if you look at the fact that, say, Black American women, the more experience of racism they have to endure, the greater the risk for asthma. It just tells us that it's not just about individual biology, it's about life in a culture. Sure. So when we are studying microorganisms in a laboratory, we grow them in a broth. We give them a broth to nourish them. We call that a culture medium. And if the organisms in this culture medium, this culture broth, were dying off in great numbers or not thriving or ill, we would call that a toxic culture. I'm saying that when in a society like ours, more and more people are getting sick, more addicted, more mentally ill, more people are cutting themselves, more people are dying of overdoses, that's also representative of a toxic culture. And I'm saying that that's what we live in, hence the subtitle of the book, Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. This culture is not one that supports healthy human growth. That is all true, that it has to do with the physical stuff. There was an article reported just the other day that half of Americans were exposed to unhealthy levels of lead when they were kids. That's toxic.
Right.
But you're right. That's not the toxic that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the nature of the culture itself, the very values of the culture, the way we bring up children, the expectations we put on human beings. They're toxic to people's healthy development. Yes, I agree with your formulation, but I would also argue that there's all kinds of science that shows the interconnections of things. So that to talk about human beings in a context and that health represents life in a context rather than just a biological event, that's science.
Mm-hmm.
And we have literally tens of thousands of scientific studies to indicate how emotional environments affect people's biology, our immune system and our hormonal apparatus and our nervous systems and our guts and our hearts and so on, and how social conditions, how inequality, how stress, how genderism or racism actually has physiological impacts. They go underneath the skin. They affect our biology. This is not speculation. My knock on the medical profession is we keep talking about evidence-based practice, but we don't look at a lot of the evidence that's already been published, including in major medical journals. So I'm not talking about insight and ideology or spirituality on the one hand and science on the other. I'm talking about science that has actually shown the interconnections. A huge, what we can call the science and practice gap.
Right.
So the problem is not with the science. The problem is that we don't put the science into practice. The average medical student does not get it. For example, I talk about trauma in this book. And trauma has many implications. Trauma has been implicated in autoimmune disease, in cancer, in addictions, in every mental health condition in the book. But the average medical student does not receive a single lecture on trauma, which is unbelievable, but it's true. For the most part, there might be a few exceptions here and there, but generally not. Secondly, doctors are very traumatized people themselves. Medical training is highly traumatic. I've talked to many physicians who talked about the assault on their sensibilities by medical school. Biologically, medical students age faster than other people their age because of the stress they're under. So you got this traumatized population treating the larger traumatized population without any awareness of trauma. So there's a huge gap.
Right.
It's true. The average person, when they think about trauma, they think of horrible events like a war, like extreme abuse, physical, sexual, emotional abuse, catastrophes, people dying, and so on. And, those are traumatic. But trauma is not the events. Trauma comes from the Greek word for wounding. So trauma is a wound that you sustain. And you can be wounded without catastrophic events. So those traumas, the big, noticeable, terrible events that happen to you, they're called, we can call big T trauma. But you can also wound people, not only by hurting them badly, but simply by not meeting their needs. And in this society, a lot of children grow up with their essential human needs being met. So that's what I call small T trauma, where people aren't doing bad things to you necessarily, but the good things that should be happening are not happening. So you can hurt people by hitting them. You can also hurt people by not giving them water, so not meeting their needs. In that sense, we have certain emotional needs as human beings, as evolved human beings, that this society not only fails to meet, but actually tramples on very deliberately and very chronically. So a lot of children get traumatized, not just by what happens to them, but by what doesn't happen to them that should have happened.
Right.
Well, trauma is a wound that if it doesn't heal, it just keeps acting up. So that airport example is me arriving back from a speaking trip at age 72 or 73, and my wife is not there to pick me up. And I go into a rage, and I become very withdrawn, which is a mirroring of exactly what happened to me when I was a year old, when my mother gave me to a stranger to save my life, and I didn't see her. So my mother wasn't available to me. And when I saw her again after 4 or 5 weeks, this is wartime Hungary, I didn't even look at her for several days, which is what an infant does to protect themselves from the pain of being abandoned again. So that wound, unless it's healed, will show up again even 70 odd years later, when the woman I'm relying on doesn't show up for me. So that's a traumatic imprint.
If this message stirred something in you, if you're starting to see the connection between your pain and your past, you're not alone. Awareness is the first step toward healing, and just by watching this, you've already taken it. You were never meant to carry those wounds forever. So take a deep breath. Be gentle with yourself, and know that healing is possible, one truth at a time. If this spoke to your soul, leave a comment below and share your journey. Someone out there needs your story. And remember, your inner child still matters.